Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the London Borough of Newham Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Can everyone on screen hear me? Those that are viewing remotely, taking part remotely. Thank you. This evening's meeting is held at Newham's Town Hall. Members unable to join us physically at this location and able to join us remotely. However, they will not be able to vote as their attendance won't be officially recorded, although their virtual attendance will be noted in the minutes. I would like to welcome the members of the public and the press who are physically attending or watching on YouTube. With regard to meeting etiquette, members of the council, please can I ask that you indicate that you wish to speak by raising your physical hand or your virtual hand if you're viewing remotely. Please, can everyone be mindful of each other and please observe sensible etiquette to help to reduce the spread of the coronavirus. Please be mindful of social distancing during and after the meeting. For this meeting, we will be aided by Roger Raymond and Clive Menzel. Colleagues, this evening's meeting of the Overdue and Scrutiny Committee is now called to order. Item 1. Welcome to you all for attending this meeting, and to those of you on the screen, and thank you for attending on the screen. Apologies for absence. Is there any apologies for absence?
No, Chair, got apologies from Councillor Chowdhury and also Conrad Hall is able to attend.
Is there any other apologies? Yeah.
Dave McNamara, my officer, is having trouble getting here, Chair.
But Dave is having trouble. Is he likely to be here or he won't?
He's messaged to say he's turned around and is going to join on Zoom.
Okay, so Dave is going to join us remotely. And the clerk will note those apologies for absence. Declaration of interest. Are there any members wishing to declare any interest? The clerk will note that no member wishes to declare any interest. Minutes of the meeting, our last meeting. Please. There's no minutes of the meeting held on the 15th of February due to the 1 week apart. So the minutes of this meeting and the minutes of the meeting that was held on the 15th of February will be taken in at our March meeting. Is that agreed?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Now we move to the first substantive item on our agenda, which is item 5. The purpose of this item is for the committee to fulfill its constitutional duty to oversee and scrutinize the council's budget. Its role is to help to ensure the executive adhere to its target in relation to spending and saving as proposed in the March 2021 budget. I'm delighted to welcome to this meeting Councillor Terence Paul, Cabinet Member for Finance and Corporate Services, and Andrew Ward, Deputy Section 151 Officer, Assistant Director for Finance and Transformation. Councillor Paul, over to yourself and Andrew, and
thank you.
10 minutes for any introductory remarks between the both of you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. I
understand that there is a presentation.
Still is, Chair. Thank you, Chair. What we've seen the key lines of inquiry, which basically focused on various issues, for example, changes in assumptions. So what we thought it best to do is for Andrew to do a presentation to cover off those points as what you wanted, and we can answer any question as the committee so wants, going from there, if that's useful, Chair.
Yeah, it is.
Andrew, over to Andrew, Chair, who will take this part of the meeting forward.
Okay, so Andrew, over to you when you're ready.
Thank you. Can you just give me a moment while I play with various windows on my screen, make sure I can see what's going on and speak to the presentation as well. You should be able to see a PowerPoint slide with a title page on at the moment. Can someone just confirm that to me?
Yes, we can. And Andrew, I would prefer it to be an interactive session. So after each slide, if you pause for me to see if members would like to ask questions based on what they've seen or is that okay?
Absolutely. There's just a couple of slides here, and then I've basically written up the key lines of inquiry. So I'll just go through this first slide, if that's okay, Chair. So I'm very pleased to sort of, well, I'm sure you've read the report, but pleased to sort of be here delivering the news on the fact that the overspend has come down to 1.1 million. That's the overspend for the general fund. You know, that's clearly the main focus of the report and of previous discussions as well, given that we had a 12.5 million overspend reported back in Q1, and the 1.1 million, that's on the same trajectory of an improved position. So we had an improvement for Q2, although still quite a serious position of 5.8 million overspend. That position did prompt a series of management actions which have been implemented. And since then, we've seen the overspend reduce and currently at a £1.1 million overspend position. There are still, still real concerns as CYPS department. We've seen some improvement in that departmental forecast, but it's still at £3.6 million over. There is a sizable overspend on the one source budgets. That does include, and of course this relates to a later item on this agenda tonight, that does include the savings targets, the corporate savings targets for procurement. What I mean by that is for the council as a whole to achieve those procurement targets. They are just being held on the one source department line. We're still concerned about the temporary accommodation overspend position. What's happened there is we're still seeing a reduction in number of households accommodated, and each household comes at a cost to the council. That was reducing, I forget the precise figure, but the trajectory or the shape of the reduction has bottomed out a bit. So still reducing, but much more shallowly, if that's the word, on a chart, if you were to chart that. I'll come to the improvements that have been listed there. So in PPP, the main budget pressure there relates to the sort of overpayment of housing benefits, which is contained within that, administered by that department, and the difficulty that we do experience into claiming back overpayments and housing benefits. So we have seen an improvement there that is largely linked to improved practices within the department, but also just if the numbers of households being accommodated and receiving housing benefit do reduce, you'd expect that budget pressure to reduce also. Compared to the previous quarter's monitoring positions, there is a large improvement in the Treasury management forecast. So we are recognising income there due to Treasury management investments. And also, as our capital programme has been reprofiled, an ambitious capital programme, I think it can be categorised at, we've reprofiled and reforecast that. It does, one of the results of that is to reduce your MRP forecast. So that is the minimum revenue provision, the paying down the mortgage in sort of layperson's terms, I suppose. If you've borrowed less money because you haven't built quite as many assets as you'd originally planned, then necessarily that charge to revenue reduces. And then just the last bullet point there is on adults and health and children. So I said children's is still a concern. I think perhaps the level of spending there better reflects really the true demand and cost of services now. But we did see, compared to previous quarters, improvements in their forecast, and I think that reflects management actions, particularly on things like reducing the number of agency staff that are working in some of those areas. If I may, Chair, I'll just sort of mention, because that's very much focused on the general fund, and the report is an overall budget monitoring report. We are forecasting a £255 million spend on the capital programme. That is an underspend of about, I think, £60 million against the reprofiled budgets. But I mean, compared to the original profile budgets, which were in excess of 400 million, I think the reprofile budgets are the more realistic ones that were set. The dedicated schools grant is in a deficit, or at the start of the year was in a deficit to 15 million. We do expect to make some inroads into reducing that deficit this year, but of around, I think, about 0.9 million, so 900,000 pound improvement in that position. The key year for that, I think, will be next year. There is more funding coming in for the high needs block of the DSG, and should, and together with the high needs recovery plan, improve that position. The
Andrew,
HRA is largely.
Andrew, are you still speaking to the first slide?
I haven't got. Yes, essentially. Sorry, I've gone off slide. I've just wanted to highlight some of the other bits that you'll see in the report. I really don't have many slides, Chair. So I'm really
talking about move on to another slide. That's okay.
Yeah, sure. And just I'll round off about the report itself. We of course included an appendix on the MTFS savings. I mean, the majority of savings will be met. There's clearly some sizable delays to the savings programme. There is a link, we believe, to the impact of the pandemic, and in the reports we try to sort of illustrate that or show that in table 2 of the main report. And then lastly, I'll just mention the risk register is part of the report as well. That's intended to describe those financial risks not contained within the actual body of the report, not sort of part of the forecast position, but that could happen. I will sort of mention that some of the figures are difficult. It's difficult to put a precise figure on any one risk. Indeed, we haven't put a figure in for some of those risks. It's more, I think, more important to sort of flag those risks and think about whether they're dynamic or inherent risks, and what can be done to mitigate against them. So, Chair, if I can just, do you want me to just move on? The next slide is just about reserves and the impact that the current forecast would have on those. And then I could sort of stop for questions if you like.
You've said a lot already. So,
okay.
So if I allow members to come in now, and then we can go into that reserve position. Is there any member who wishes to ask any question?
Not on that slide.
Okay. Right. There seems to be no question for your first slide, so you can now go on to the reserve slide. Okay, so it's given what happened in the, I'll just get my years correct, the 2020-21 financial year, where reserves started out at 13.2 and reduced largely as a result of the pandemic by £9 million. So that was the overspend last financial year, and left reserves at the outset of this year at 4.2 million, just to consider the what's going on or what's happening to those reserves. We've budgeted as part of our MTFS for every year, including the current year, to put £3 million back into reserves. So that's within the budget. If we then have an overspend, as we are currently forecast to, of 1.1 million, the sort of net impact of that, we start at 4.2, put 3 million back into 7.2, and then have to take out 1.1 million to basically fund that overspend, we'd be left with 6.1 million at the year end. So that's basically the projection for the general reserve at the moment. There is a note at the bottom there. The sort of generally accepted practice for reserves is to aim for something like in the region of 5% of your net budget requirement, which when we look ahead to the budget being set for the following financial year, 22-23, is in excess of 300 million. So that would equate to something over 15 million. So just to give a sort of scale where we are, we certainly, I think, are on the right strategy of building them back by £3 million each year to get there. So I'm happy to take questions on reserves. Any member? There's no member. I myself will make some general comments at the end of your presentation. I haven't seen any indications, so we may go into the next slide. So the next slide, does it come? Sorry, there we go. Those were the sort of key lines of inquiry. I sort of
view these as the sort of general questions we can expect, or that you provided about the budget monitoring position. So I've just really prepared a couple of notes for myself to speak to against each of those questions, if that's okay. So if I just sort of take one at a time, and I'm sure Councillor Paul may want to add as well. In terms of the key assumptions underlying our forecasts, not much has changed, Chair. So the one significant one that could that really could impact upon those forecasts is a pay rise, and of course I'm talking about the pay rise for local government staff for the 21-22 financial year. That's the current financial year, which, as I speak, has not been agreed yet. The pay offers, I think, were more generous for those at the lower end of the pay scale, but sort of were essentially being, the initial offers were at 1.75. Our budget allows for a 2% pay rise, and obviously we're sort of getting closer and closer towards the year end. If the final pay offer is made at above that rate, it will change the financial forecast. Another key assumption is that we don't expect any further COVID funding, any significant emergency COVID funding. The government continues to fund very specific initiatives through grant, which can be viewed as sort of very helpful, or alternatively sort of slightly administratively difficult. But in terms of sort of the general funding support for local governments, that we're not expecting any more of that to come. We have the 5th tranche of that at the start of this year of 12.5 million, and that we don't expect that to be repeated. The other sort of quite topical issue really on key assumptions is inflation, which is clearly way above the Bank of England target of 2%. So I think it was 5.4% CPI for the last month. As I've just described, you know, that does, we do have a risk on employee pay settlements, which clearly has some sort of link to inflationary pressures and cost of living. In terms of sort of contracts, some of those are linked. Some of our contracts will be linked to RPI, CPI type indicators, but they will take a while to flush through. And given that we're nearly at the end of the financial year, I'm not seeing a lot of change in the forecast due to inflation. We do expect the price of, or we are seeing the price of materials increase, and that was reported in the capital monitoring report, which is appended to the budget monitoring, and expect materials to sort of increase in cost by 7 to 8%. So we could see some pressures on individual projects within the capital programme due to that. We expect sort of the managers for those projects to be doing their utmost to work out ways to manage those costs, and they would also plan in some contingency against that for most of those projects. So just in terms of that was what I had in mind in terms of the key assumptions around this budget monitoring. And yeah, happy to take questions or Councillor Paul.
Any questions, any member? Councillor Parkway, Councillor Wilson.
I have a question. My question is about the total purchase card spend and about the reduction. I know in the report it talked about that sharp reduction in October. Can you just talk us through some of the management actions that you took to get that outcome? Because it's a good outcome, so I'm not knocking it. But I'm just interested into what the difference is between the months previous and that month, and what you did to get down to where you got to.
Okay, so purchase card. The immediate action was to effectively cut the spending, the total spending limits on purchase cards by 50%. So we just halved the amount there. There were some exceptions to that where it really didn't make sense to do that. So I think in some cases like social care, where they would just habitually need to spend over some of the limits that they had. I think it sent quite a strong signal to people that we were monitoring and looking at purchase card spend, and it also just practically makes it that bit more difficult to spend money. So you're working within a limit on a single card as an officer. So you're probably thinking about what you can add to that card within that month, and I think forcing some more choices. But we were careful, like I said, in in places like where purchase cards are used for sort of emergency situations, not to include them in that sort of blanket reduction in the amount they can spend. I certainly I do hear, and we do receive requests to lift the limits on cards, but we're reasonably strong in saying we like officers to be doing a better job of just planning and managing their spend. And it's also important, really, purchase cards are not meant to be the default method for full spending, and they're not the default method for spending. We do want more spending to get onto purchase orders. Spending can then be tracked, and that ultimately will end up in more data and information to make some procurement savings out of as well. But the new limits we imposed on purchase cards have been held, and they're still in place now.
Can I just add to that? I'm trying to find the exact date, but from memory serves me correct, I think it was the 7th of December, Andrew, if you could confirm that, where we published an actual specific cabinet report on the management actions. So it wasn't just the purchase cards. It was
well, the management actions did come in earlier than that. I'd have to look at
but there was a report, wasn't there?
Yeah.
Which might be, I might want to read into the record via the clerk chair, but there was a specific report in December, it's either the 7th or the 14th from memory, where we set out the number of management actions. So yes, purchase cars was an important element, but it wasn't the one club which hit it. You know, things like agency workers, spending on consultants, like external training, recruitment consultants. There was a raft of measures, but I just thought it was important, Chair, if I can read that into the record, perhaps via the clerk and Andrew, we can get the exact reference put in the report for members looking at it.
Chair, if I may.
Yes.
Just got a supplementary there for you, Andrew. It's really interesting because obviously that question that I asked was pertaining only to the purchase cards. But where else in your department are you using that sort of psychological or behavioural analysis to reduce spends? Because essentially what you're saying is that you just shrunk the playing field and people started to play within their bullpen. So the question is, where else are you using that sort of action?
I think sort of budget behaviour is a really interesting area, and one we should be looking at more. But it's not the only action. So in terms of performance appraisals, the requirement for managers to work, you cannot pass your performance appraisal now. You cannot get a pass if you are not working within your budget. And I say within, it's not a target spend for you to achieve. It's an absolute limit to work within. So that is now part of every single manager's performance appraisal framework. So that's a message. There was also an action back in the autumn to make some redundancies to management staff, which does send a signal that how serious the position was. It was a necessary action, but in of itself, it does have a sort of knock-on effect. I suppose I'm no psychologist, but you know, it does send a strong signal, and I think that's part and parcel of it as well. Then there was the limits on purchase orders. We lifted, if you like, there sort of as a hierarchy to council officers, and so we moved the ability to approve a purchase order up one within the hierarchy. So more managers were then spending more attention because they personally had to approve the purchase orders on what's being spent. So where you might have been able to, lower level officers may be able to approve expenditure of up to £1,000 on purchase orders. Those purchase orders now went to the sort of management level above them. So more scrutiny and looking at what have been done there. The last thing I'd sort of like to mention is we've tried internally on our intranet just to celebrate those managers, we call them spend saviours, who are doing a better job really in terms of finding more innovative ways as well of thinking about their budget and working to achieve good outcomes for the council, but within the budget limits they set, and sort of sharing the news of that in internal management meetings.
Okay, Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, mine's on capital programmes. If other people want to go on, then anything on revenue.
Is there any other, Ellen and Josh? It's difficult to see from behind. Ellen and then Josh.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I was following.
Ellen and then Josh.
Oh, apologies.
Thank you. I wonder, could you give us a brief idea of what is in the updated recovery plan for high needs spending? Only it's of great concern to schools and governors, and it would be helpful just to get a brief idea of what is in the plan.
I'm not best placed to give you a sort of, I appreciate you've just asked for a brief outline, but I'm not best placed to give you an awful lot of detail on that, I'm afraid. Well, a considerable part of it is an 8% or something, it's 8.2% increase in high needs block funding that's coming through to NUM for next year. So that's certainly been acknowledged. The plan does depend on the full and proper rollout of education healthcare plans and making sure that those are integral to the sort of funding agreements there. I'm a little limited on the detail, I'm afraid, to give you more information on that.
I accept that that's not your area of expertise, Andrew. So what I would ask Roger to do is to follow up with the education department and ask them the same question that Ellen has posed. And can you supply that through me so we can then pass it on to Ellen?
Certainly, of course. I'd just add that I'm well aware that officers are working closely with not just the schools forum, but its sub-working parties as well.
I'm aware.
And if yourself, as Andrew, can speak to your counterpart over in the education, and Terry, if you can speak to.
Yeah, can I? In the budget note, it does set out in outline terms about the high needs and early block, and I suspect the actual detail will be covered in the children's scrutiny. Yeah. So I suspect the answers are already in the domain of scrutiny, Chair.
We have obviously we haven't had a recent scrutiny in terms of looking at the children budget. So Ellen, if whatever is there, we are not up to date in it. And Ellen is not up to date. So it is a useful question. And if that can be provided to us.
Could I ask that Councillor Sarah Rivers provide that to you rather than us? Because obviously we're not the detailed, and I do respect to Ellen's question.
That's a reasonable request. Yeah. Because you were the political lead, I would have a word with Sarah and have a word with her too. And Andrew. And through Roger, if we have a word with the relevant.
I want to do justice to the question.
Yeah, it just makes certain that with the answers come back.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Just on that, the schools forum is meeting on Monday. It coincides with council, unfortunately, and there'll be a further discussion on the very item that Sarah, Ellen's raised, but it is coming back to schools forum on Monday.
Okay.
There's a paper that's only just been released tonight, and I represent the local authority at that, so there'll be that's already. It won't be in the public domain till Monday, but we've got an update coming to us then.
Only I'm aware it's a national problem.
This paper that we have now is in the public domain. The budget proposal is already in the public domain because council is on Monday. Yeah. So I'm sure I will speak to Sarah and Roger if we can request that we get it by Friday so that Ellen can have it to peruse it over the weekend. So she's prime and ready for our meeting on Monday.
No, Ellen's not on school forum.
No, I'm not on school forum.
Sorry, it's a procedural thing I have to be clear about. Sorry.
Okay. Thank you. Now, Councillor Wilson, sorry.
No,
Josh.
Garfield was probably.
Thank you, Chair. Response to Councillor Lee Parkway's questions, actually. Primarily out of curiosity, this measure to incorporate a budget and keeping within one's budget and their spend into appraisals, I wonder, A, what the response from management has been to that. Have staff adopted that willingly, or has there been some pushback? And jogging my memory for part B of my question, which is definitely there, and yet has escaped me. So please, Andrew, you can answer that, and I'll try and remember part B if you don't mind.
It was sort of, I think, universally agreed at CMT, so amongst corporate directors, and I can honestly say I'm not aware of any disquiet or not aware of any objection that's been made to me by managers. I think it's quite a reasonable expectation of council officers to have in their performance targets.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you, Andrew. And I remember part B, honestly. With regards to the procurement threshold of £1,000 being pushed up the chain to more senior management, I imagine that will result in more officer hours being dedicated to individual purchases. And there must have been some knock-on effects in terms of productivity. Is that a measure that is just in place for the emergency process while we are over budget, or is that a long-term fixed decision that you think is worthwhile to go into the future?
It was put into place as a response to the overspend. What we've certainly committed to in our outturn reporting, and this was one of the recommendations that internal audit, I agreed with internal audit as a result of their recent audit of budget monitoring, was to do a review and a report on the effectiveness of some of these measures. I mean, I think the report, the reporting discussion tonight sort of shows that the volume hasn't necessarily reduced as a result of that. You made a point about that it's an administrative task that sort of perhaps ties up management resource. That may well be a factor. Where I didn't hear any objections or disquiet on the performance target measure, that's probably not true of this one, you know, of purchase orders, to be quite frank and honest with you. Not a universally a popular measure. So, you know, we do need to review the impact of that. And, well, sorry to say, but learn what has worked and what hasn't.
Sure.
But I think we want to do that from our outturn reporting. The sort of the initial view is certainly the volume hasn't reduced. The actual pattern of spend can be quite lumpy. I think we probably need to compare it against previous years, and going back, not the previous year perhaps not being the best baseline for obvious reasons.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. I appreciate that. Just for the benefit of members, if I may, Chair, the first measure is one that has been received quite well and is, as far as we're aware, or concerned, permanent. But the latter, with regards to procurement, is temporary and will be reviewed in the future, just so we're clear as a committee.
Yes, it remains in place until it doesn't. So it doesn't just end at the end of the year. It will remain in place going into next year. But yeah, subject to review, I'm sure.
Brilliant. Thank you, Andrew. And thank you, Chair.
All right. I haven't noticed anyone else. So
Back to me on capital, yeah?
yeah. Fine. Okay.
Sorry, I did have a question, but my hand has been up for one.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't notice. You may, Paul, if it's still on revenue, before I bring in Neil on capital.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Neil. So this really relates, Andrew, just to the temporary accommodation information in the pack. So I could see that the figures have remained fairly static in terms of the overall numbers of people in temporary accommodation through 2021. And I can also see clearly that the largest expense is the sort of the nightly paid TA, and there are about 3,000 plus people in there. So through the process, really, can you give us a little bit more insight into some of the lessons learned in terms of next steps with this? Because it seems that it's a static measure. I know that it's quite difficult to measure it against last year, but it'd be useful to know where we were in 2019 and whether or not that's an improving picture. Quite difficult to measure 2020, 21, but it'd be useful to know where we were in 2019. And also, I think in terms of where do we sit as a borough in terms of addressing that particular issue with our neighbouring boroughs? Are we learning lessons from, you know, where best practice might exist elsewhere, or are we actually, you know, doing everything possible that we can to address this particular issue? It seems that the outcome isn't as great as we would want it to be. So the savings, you know, are not as they could be. And it seems that there's also a bit of a risk in there should we not hit that sort of 44 number reduction that we built in year on year. So it's a bit of a long question, but I'm really interested in lessons learned and next steps around that. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll do my very best to give you a comprehensive answer. I may fail in some instance of it, but give me a chance. So, in terms of the numbers there, I mean, I don't have the precise number, but I'm pretty sure it was of the region of around 300 households. Additional households were taken into temporary accommodation at the outset of the pandemic. Once into the system, that's a reason. It's not necessarily an absolutely permanent increase, but it has come down slowly since. So, most of those I think you can expect to see still within the temporary accommodation. So, a sizable shock to that sort of nightly booked case numbers there. This year, yes, we did see a sort of quite rapid reduction in those numbers at the outset. I think some of that, and I'm speculating a little bit here, but we do meet and monitor on a monthly basis with housing colleagues to look at this forecast. And at the outset of the year, the reduction did look quite encouraging, and you can see the change from previous months. So I'm on page 12 of the report, and that's the table you're looking at, aren't you? Sorry, that's table. It's in paragraph 4.7 for anyone wanting to follow that. Did look encouraging. I think the whole rental market went under quite a shock through the pandemic and as we came out of the pandemic, but the positions changed again. And again, I'm sort of relaying what I've been challenging and probing our housing colleagues on at the moment, that it's becoming more difficult, where they did see rents fall. And that sort of has a knock-on effect in a number of ways, so that people can make their own arrangements, or we're able to secure more permanent arrangements and discharge our duty to them. But rents are now coming back up is what housing colleagues report to us. In terms of how we compare to London, I mean, I think we have one of the highest caseload numbers across London. Again, I'm sorry I don't have the benchmark number, but I'm sure colleagues would be able to sort of pick that up in scrutiny with colleagues from housing. But we are the third largest London borough as well, so to be expected. We clearly, and this links to the savings tracker, did not achieve the saving to do local space. There was a sort of plan to utilise certain properties. We had to, the plan was predicated on accessing GLA grant funding, and the space requirement on those properties was then enforced by the GLA, which kind of essentially sort of did really affect that plan. So we haven't been able to achieve that saving, which has caused the overspend. Sorry, Paul, there's probably various elements to your question I haven't answered very well there. So
can I add
to come back?
Councillor Paul has indicated he wants to come in.
Thank you for your question, Paul. There are three elements I want to add to Andrew's answer about the nightly paid in temporary accommodation. One, as Andrew alluded to it, how can I put it? There's a very focused conversation between finance and housing colleagues where we to understand the picture. And I can assure you every stone is turned over to look at that number. Andrew alluded, I think we had the meeting this morning, which I couldn't attend, but Andrew was there, and we look at the long-term projection. So Andrew is not going to tell you, but he knows that we have the projected figure, what that figure is to the end of the financial year, which is an approved position to what you see today. But let me give you that assurance, we are aware of the long-term trend. The second point is about our prevention service. In the past year, housing have, let's say, up their game in that area and are providing a better prevention service to residents to ensure we don't enter unnecessarily the expected nightly paid market, and what we use all interventions as possible to reduce that issue. That's two. On the third element is us strategically providing additional spaces. So obviously in the budget, there's £1 million in the budget for temporary accommodation, but you might know a building next to Plaistow Police Station. It's called Ron Newton House, right? You know it. because of very well, that has literally been acquired into the council stock to provide much needed temporary accommodation. And I know, having worked with Andrew and others on that building does contain some specific issues like good size accommodation, even down to the lifts, right? So that's what, so we are looking at properties which specifically meet the needs of our population, right? So let me give you that assurance. And there are other scale acquisitions in the pipeline within the London Borough of Newham to make sure we don't have to enter that very expensive spot market. And hopefully that will give you some assurance, Paul, to you, but thank you for the question.
Thank you. Any other me?
Yeah, I welcome
for the capital question.
Yeah, I welcome the position of the capital programme. That's very detailed. Thank you very much between you. I note that the approved budget in paragraph 1.3 on big page 53, the original approved budget for last financial year presented as part of the medium-term financial report in February 2021 was at 446.1 million. And that was subsequently reviewed for obvious reasons. And then there's still at month 9, a current total forecast spend of 257 million. So we are spending the money within that, but it is 63.4 less than the revised budget. And one of my usual questions really is that, are we getting better with, even with all these difficulties and everything that's been highlighted in the report on pages 54 onwards is at amber, Andrew, isn't it? You know, there's been slippage, and I love this phrase, inherent optimism bias, because we've got an ambitious programme. So we've got a review of the whole capital programme, if I'm correct, but it is, I think, right to flag up that we've got unallocated funds on table 5 carried forward of 12.6 million for various projects, some of which we might have interest in, like Plaistow Library investment. And we've got, in addition to that availability, longer lead-in times, the inflation is differential. You rightly highlight that the ONS is projecting a rise of 7 to 8% in material costs. The cost of construction workers, notwithstanding the Brexit effect, would be higher, I would assume. And what I'm basically asking is, in terms of this forecast and variance analysis, how does that interlink with what we had at the end of last year at a similar point? Are we in a better position? I think we are, in terms of not necessarily the spending of capital, but at least monitoring where we've been. And that's in spite of COVID and an ambitious programme and this optimism bias. But I just wanted to, think, because it's coming to other committees, I sit on, this red, amber, green thing. They're all at amber. Are we likely to get to a position where we'll ever be green with all this uncertainty around differential inflation, construction and an ambitious programme and what we've not allocated in the past? A nice easy one. That's why I left it to last, Anthony.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson.
Councillor Paul, do you want me to start on that one?
Yeah, start.
Yeah. Okay. So yes, I do think there is inherent optimism bias on any on capital programs. Indeed, they teach that as part of the SIPFA studies. Actually, it's the one thing to look out for, or one of the many things to look out for. It's certainly a problem. So we're certainly a problem we're aware of, is the point I want to make there. We are, I think, in a better position than last year. Certainly the finance service are doing more. Whether we're doing enough, we want to do more, but we are doing more to challenge the soundness of the financial forecasts that come through. The format of this report has evolved a bit across this year. There is the RAG rating and the financial comments against the directorates there. We do need to sort of move that into a mature phase where you're really getting a red and a green as in addition to the ambers. You of course appreciated the uncertainty that we're working in in the current climate. The spend to date, if we use that as a measure against last year, and last year was obviously a very difficult year for construction, particularly. If we look at that, a lot of the capital spend that ends up on our ledger, it does end up being recorded towards the end of the financial year. So the sort of spend to date figure, the best way of looking at it is against the previous year. So we're well ahead of where we were in the previous year, which means we're sort of in line there or thereabouts in terms of the final forecast figures for this year. So, learning from the spending pattern, that's what I mean by that. Last year, we've got some assurance that we will get towards those forecasts in this report. There is, I think, in popular and housing and the HRA, the possibility where acquisitions come on that suddenly represents, you're not building something. It's suddenly suddenly a very quick increase to your capital spend. So that's particularly, I think, in some of the popular forecasts as well. One thing you highlight is the impact of inflation, and I'm thinking about how we again evolve our monitoring. If the costs of projects increase, that's not necessarily a good thing. I mean, what we want to see here is delivery against budget, and the number of projects that come in on time and on budget is really the ultimate goal. So I will think hard on how to make sure we sort of reflect that in subsequent reports, because simply recording more spend because of inflation is not what anyone really wants to see in terms of Newman's capital programme, I'm sure. So we are certainly aware of the issues that Councillor quite rightly points out. We are evolving our monitoring of the capital programme, and also how we think about what future capital programmes look like as well. And we hope to sort of continuously improve really in our monitoring and challenging of that. I'm sorry if that's a bit rambling. There's a lot of points to consider as well.
That's fine. I'll come back after Terry. Terry,
fine.
Yeah, and just to note, and it relates to particularly people often assuming that if there are academies that we're no longer responsible for schools capital. But, I note on page 60 of the report about the main works complete at both Brampton and Forest Gate that are no longer community schools, they're clearly academies. But there is predominantly slippage in the school's expansion project because of unallocated basic needs balances on new allocations added to the programme. And that's due to no decision formally agreed as to where this funding will be used, and therefore any significant spend unlikely before 22-23. As I say, I speak as the local authorities representative on the schools forum, and I think it's right to flag up that with the best will in the world, we have to go through other channels in order that some of the capital programme is used up. I think Ellen will know where I'm going with that, as we're on governing bodies where we're lower down the list. And the sooner we can get, so there's a backlog within schools capital programme, and there has been some disagreement with formal decisions, not made easier by us having residual works to do around was previously within our estate, but now part of the academies programme. I hope that's not too convoluted. For instance, on that page, it says, if you have, for instance, a school that is adjunct to the hospital and is in the edge of my ward called Brampton, there's obviously external works in highways as well as the school's interest in that. So it's a convoluted process. Andrew, I think all I need to really ask is, do you agree? Have I put that correctly? I don't want to, if anybody's watching publicly, I'm trying to be as political as possible, but about a procedural point.
Fairly comprehensively raised the issues surrounding the school's capital programme there. So, yes.
Thanks, Tony. Thanks for indulging me on that one.
I haven't seen anyone else, so I will reserve this part. Thank you, Mayor and colleagues, for your contribution. And for the benefit of the viewing public, witnessing this session, I just need to, by way of explanation, to explain a few things. The role of Overview and Scrutiny Committee is to scrutinize the executive policy, implementation of these policies, and outcomes. Our role is not to be adversarial, but to be critical and make recommendations when necessary, and to commend when the occasion arises. That said, I must commend the Cabinet Member for Finances, Councillor Terry Paul, and the Mayor, Conrad Orr, who is the Section 151 Officer, Andrew Ward, who is present, the Chief Exec, Cabinet members, and other executive officers and colleagues for the positive efforts that they have made in the budget management and budget control for the 2021-2022 budget. The budget is by no means out of the woods as yet. We still have areas such as CYP, that is children and young people's area, one source, and temporary accommodation. To name a few, that still has to be controlled. And I'm assured that the executive is doing everything possible to get that under control and to maintain that position. Colleagues, and for the viewing public, we in Budget Scrutiny and the Overview and Scrutiny Committee ought to be encouraged, however, that the budget is moving in the right direction. Period one, I was alarmed when I was told by Councillor Paul that our projected overspend is 12.5 million. Period two, I was slightly encouraged when we made, and there was a projected savings, when the projected overspend was then 5.7 million or thereabout. And period three, I was more encouraged when the projected overspend is 1.1 million. And that is a position to be grateful for in terms of budget and management. So I commend the executive and Councillor Paul for that. Since I've been involved in budget scrutiny for the last 8 years or so, this financial year is the best that I've seen children and young people's budget. 3.6 million is a lot, but it's a marked improvement on the previous years. So at least this gives me the impression they must be doing something right. Reserve. No one has mentioned much about reserve in this questioning and this budget monitoring session. Councillor Paul, in his last year's budget, or the current year budget, proposed a 7 million reserve position at the close of the year. He's projecting 6.1. And members of the public and colleagues might wonder why aren't we taking him to task? I, for one, am not taking him to task on that because I think he's taking some tough decision and he didn't take the easy way out for political expediency or for political purposes. 10.7 million has been set aside for other areas, COVID contingencies and other contingencies. And he could have easily taken some of that money, put it and clear the and make his budget projection in terms of reserve 7 million as he's supposed to have done, rather than leaving it at 6.1. So I think that shows leadership in that area of budget management, and that ought to be commended. So, whilst we're still not out of the woods, our job is to continue to monitor and scrutinize budget performance. But this is the last budget monitoring session that we have, and the next one I think is in September. Is it that correct, Roger? So it's, sorry, July. It's going to be July, period 2. So this is the last session we're going to be having in this current budget. So I am just taking the opportunity to say thank you for the work that has been done. It's not always been easy. You've had to face us with some difficult questions at times, but it's paid dividends. And I must say, whilst praising yourself, I must also praise my colleagues and thank you very much for holding the executive to account, because we've all played a role in holding the executive to account And Terry knows that he had to come and face us from time to time with budget performance. And I've seen some of my colleagues smiling because they know they've put him through his paces from time to time. So thank you all for the work that you've done. Okay, so
Chair.
And I would end there, and Councillor Paul wants to come in.
Chair, can I thank you for your kind words? And I want to start at the last point you finished on, was about the role the committee has played. I've sat here during the past year and been challenged on the figures, and obviously have been held to account alongside with Conrad and Andrew. So the committee has played its role in scrutiny, and I thank you for that. And also for the more collegiate way we did it this year than in previous years. I thank you on that. The other point I want to say that obviously it's down to the hard work of the staff, okay? And that must be recognised. And I just want to draw out in that is Andrew and Conrad and the rest of the finance team. Because without those individuals, we wouldn't be here in that figure, right? But I do want to say it's a tribute to the staff. The questions were asked earlier by Councillor Garfield and Councillor Lee Parkway about the management actions and the impact of the management actions. I won't bore you with the internal discussions of how we got there, but we got there, right? And the key lesson to that is that we should trust our staff, actually, to do the grown-up thing. And I mean that in a really collaborative way, and to trust them as well. What's not been said is the discussions with staff about how we go about and do this, okay? And they're being part of that discussion. And you would expect me, Chair, to put on public and to spend my time making sure that staff are fully recognised in their effort, because this doesn't happen by me, Conrad and Andrew sitting in the room pointing at each other, right? It's about a collaboration amongst that. Just to go on to the point you made better than I would possibly have made, as I call it, there is a contingency. I call it contingency, you call it contingency. There's a sum of money which are in the budget, which is there, you know, just in case for COVID and other things which come out of the woodwork. You're right, I could have taken the easy option and had no contingency reserves and used that to come and say to you today, actually, there is no overspend. And hopefully, Chair, me, Conrad and Andrew not doing that, I think is a measure of our sort of transparency and how we are focused on getting it right. This is not about taking the short-term decision, it's about doing the right thing. And sometimes doing the right thing is not saying yes to everything, right? So I just want to put that on the record. But I want to give an assurance to the committee that if we do get through this short period of time without any pressure on contingencies, we do squeeze the lemon a little bit more and get it down from 1.1 to get it down further, then there is more money to put back and to bolster that position into our reserves position. Andrew mentioned that we want to take the reserves up to 15 million rather than 13 to give us that bolster against what could come down the path. So I just want to give the committee and residents that are tuning in tonight the confidence that us in the finance team, me, Andrew and Conrad, are acutely aware of the known unknowns which potentially could be coming our way in the next 4 years because of our situation. And I think it's not just about this year, it's about laying down the foundation so we can withstand economic and potential pandemic pressures which come down the future. And also on the final point, I would say, Chair, going forward with regards to what we do as an organisation, this is about us focusing on our priorities. And I just want people to write that down, to understand that. And when, as councillors, we come and say we must do this, well, I say to everyone, what about our children's budget? What about our NRPF? What about our temporary accommodation? And if you notice, Chair, those are the things which we in finance put forward to support, because I am, how can I put it? There's a question asked by yourself actually 6 months ago to me, which I remembered was on children's budget. You said you challenged me and say, well, was the budget right in the first place? Are you matching the need? And I took that away and cogitated on that. So that's why you see in the report given today, we are clearly focused on the organisation's challenges, children's services, and they're on an improvement journey, and we've got to support those. Temporary accommodation and non-recourse to public funds. And I look across the council like Meenie Shah, who for a number of years has been consistent in saying, what about that? And I think you, Councillor Shah, and other councillors have one beautifully made the point to me privately and in public. And I just use that as an example, Chair, but I do listen, I do go away. But I just want you to know the budget is there for you. I am acutely, how can I put it, aware of the economic and financial shocks which could present this council, right? Acutely aware. Inflation is an unknown known. We've got the economic pressures as unwinding, and inflation is our biggest risk. And I think as an organisation, we've got to focus on the uncomfortable things which might present us for the future. However, this budget lays the foundation for us to withstand those strategic shocks. But I thank you for the comments and words, and I will relay that back. I may send the staff a clip, Chair, of your kind words. Now we're a modern online organisation. Even I can do it on social media now. So I will do that. But thank you for your kind words.
Thank you, colleagues. I will now move on to item 6 of the agenda, improvement plan for procurement of the council. The purpose of this item is to review the council's processes in relation to procurement to ensure that the governance procedures are effective. I'm delighted to welcome to this meeting Rose Younger, Director of Procurement, and Dave McMahara, who should be online with us, Director of Finance. Is Dave online with us? Yeah, Dave is online.
Good evening, Councillor.
Okay. So over to the both of you, who's going to go first? You have between, I know there is a presentation. If you have any opening remarks between yourselves, you have 5 minutes for opening remarks before you go into the presentation, and then members will be asking you questions.
Sure.
You will do the same after each slide. If you pause, this for members to ask questions before you go on.
Thank you, Chair. What you'll see in this presentation is, first of all, a position statement of where we were last year. We've got an example which will make it live in everyone's mind. We want to take you through what we've done in terms of the process, and keywords to take that is the word gateway, which Rose will come on to, and then we'll take you through what we've done to improve it. But Dave and Rose, fire away.
Dave, are you okay if I carry on? Good evening. Thank you very much for inviting me back. So I'll just go back to, and I'll refer to your key lines of inquiry, and this presentation is geared around the key lines of inquiry. I think the issues that I found when I got here were actually quite well highlighted in that insurance issue that we encountered in March of last year, I think it was.
Yes.
So I think there was a series of issues which I think that particular procurement highlighted. There was a lack of a procurement forward plan, so there was no pipeline of activity. There was a heavy reliance on agency staff, and those agency staff are being managed by agency staff. And in fact, there were 3 tiers of that management. There's a lack of project management control within procurement. We had no project management system, and there was a lack of pipeline management, and that's kind of all of those things are connected. So that's a bit of a summary of where we started and the issues that I found. Councillor Paul very helpfully mentioned the word gateway management, and this is common in most councils, that you have set gates, hard gates, beyond which a procurement cannot proceed unless it fulfills certain criteria. This is a map of that criteria, which we are now managing We have a weekly gateway review meeting, and projects are managed through these gates. Somebody who wants to run a tender will bring a paper business case at each of those gates through to procurement. So we're now managing procurement activity in a much stronger way. I'm going to go on. Does anybody want to ask any questions about that? There's some more detail coming about Gateway shortly. So,
Yes, I'm Councillor Lee Parkway.
Thank you, Chair. At the time when we saw you in March, I'm assuming from what you're saying that this didn't exist in the organisation. The question I want to know at this point is what did exist? So at that time, how did they get to a decision that it merits procurement and we're going to take it from A to B to C? Was it a simple, well, you tell me, let me not tell you.
okay. So, okay, sorry, I'm told to speak up.
Yeah, please.
Sorry.
Please.
Sorry. Ex-teacher, I'm trying to lower my voice so I don't shout.
Project boom.
Yeah, some of shouting.
All right, I apologise, sorry. Actually, I'd be hard-pressed to answer the question. It was largely contained within the category teams. So there were 3 category teams, one covering construction, place-based procurement, highways, waste, those kind of things. Another category team focused on people, so children's, adults and public health. And another category team focused on corporate, so IT, cleaning, security, those kind of things. So the decisions were very much within those teams and linking back to the service that was procuring that service, so possibly a director, a budget manager, or manager within the service. I would honestly be hard pressed to tell you whether there was a standard throughout, and that's why very quickly we started to implement this. In fact, we were already looking at it when the insurance issue hit. So there was no standard formula, there was no proper management, and there was certainly no gateway management.
Thank you. I think I was supplementary, Chair.
Yep, you may.
You talk about 3 layers of agency staff.
Yeah.
I only got elected in 2018, but ever since I got elected, all I know hearing about is agency staff in every single department. And you meet an officer, and before you know it, you ask where's so-and-so, oh, they're gone. And then a new person comes in, and then you ask, where's that? They're gone as well.
Yeah.
What measures are you putting in place to ensure that we have good staff retention in your department? Because it seems to me that's probably one of the biggest issues this council faces is churn of employees. What is it that you're going to do differently to ensure that we don't meet those issues again?
It's a really good question, because clearly one of the reasons that people go is for more money, and often to the private sector, and we can't compete with that. Actually, it's really difficult to compete with that. So I referred earlier to the fact that I was a teacher. So I have a tendency to try and grow our own. So bring in youth. We've taken some Kickstarters. We've got a couple of apprentices, and we're training them within the department to grow them. What we're trying to also do is use the apprenticeship levy to train people professionally, so they're not tied to us, because that sounds, but we do as we're training them, they are linked with the training agreement, so that for a period of 1 or 2 years, and it depends on the level of the training. So I think one is about growing people, bringing young people in, place old people like me. 2 is to train them up and give them a professional qualifications, and 3, I think there's something about pride. So I do try and thank my team, and I spend a lot of time individually with young members of the team. You know, if they're preparing for an interview for a new role, I spend time with them. So I think it's about quality. We can't always offer them more money because, you know, we have a finite financial resource. But we, you know, I think, so that's the kind of approach I'm taking at the moment.
I may, Chair.
Yeah, Councillor Shaw.
Following on from Councillor Parkway's question. So what about staff incentives? If I look at the social services and then social workers, there's a massive churn all the time. They come here to Newham, get their experience, and they go to places like Surrey and elsewhere. How can we retain them? Is
I'll answer that.
things that we can have. Some boroughs do things like affordable homes for 5 years, that sort of incentive. So they stay in the borough because we need some of these good social workers to stay in the borough.
I like that.
Can I interject? Why is it's important that we talk about staff retention? That is a staff retention issue mostly. And we're here to talk about the procurement. And I know Rose has take us there when she talked about higher salary for procurement workers. But if we could just keep it to procurement for now, and then we can then deal with staff retention with social workers later. Okay, I'm sorry, but I just need to keep it procurement. Thank you.
Yeah, keep it to procurement.
It just on it's in terms of this diagram in front of us. PIF, is it something that I did?
Procurement initiation form. Sorry, some of these titles are quite long, so we've abbreviated it. It is explained further on, sorry.
Project initiation documents. So at that stage, which is stage 0, bearing in mind all the staffing issues that's had in the past, who initiates? Is it when, or how is it triggered? Is it when a contract is towards the end, within that, and I think you may have had me questioning this at various other fora we've met at, at what stage is initiation, bearing in mind that there's been these historical difficulties. So that a contract's going to end, shall we say, at the end of this financial year. I would ideally think that there should be quite a long lead-in programme so that we don't have a sort of dip and, when there's these people in and out movement. So at what stage, stage 0, before the end of the contract, are we working towards? We may not have got there yet.
Okay.
You see where I'm going with this?
Absolutely, I do. And I do talk about the procurement forward plan in a while, but...
Okay, well, come back to it if you wish.
Just to reassure you that the work that we've been working for a year solidly on the contract register, it's improved significantly. And we've added columns into that register, which has, but in months, how long is it going to take us to run this procurement? So it might end on the 31st of December. It's going to take us to, if it's going to be a procurement of 9 months, say, the alert will trigger by the end of March. Actually, what we want to do is start before that, so at least a month before that. And of course, what happens is the waste contract, for example, that's a 2-year competitive dialogue. So each procurement has got a number of months that is in that column to give us an idea of how long it's going to take to re-procure. And that's specific to each contract type. So that is in the contract register, and we're building alerts into that document. So if you were a contract manager, you would get a polite note from me that says, this contract's coming to an end on the 31st of December. Is it on the way? The procurement in the procurement forward plan, the idea of that is it's driven by the contract register, clearly. Not every contract goes onto procurement forward plan. If it's housing, it's rarely repeated. Those are each bespoke contracts, so they're not normally on the procurement forward plan. But clearly your IT contract, your security contract, those will need to be re-procured, and those will go to Cabinet. That procurement forward plan will go to Cabinet en bloc. And the new guidance from government is that it covers 2 to 3 years in advance. So procurement there will be procurement visibility of 2 to 3 years of pipeline going to Cabinet, ideally twice a year, because things might change slightly. But that's the plan. So we're doing quite a lot to make sure there's pre-warning. Both the contract register got the detail, and that feeds the procurement forward plan, and that would let the contract manager know something needs to be done.
Tony, can I have my supplementary on that? Yeah, sorry, and then I'll. Yeah. It's just that you rightly, talked about the waste contracts, and that's coming, quite current, and we're looking at that in scrutiny in another fora. But and there's different timescales. I get that, but historically, and over the terms that we've reached here, sometimes things have just been extended.
Yes.
Regardless of quality, because we've been too late, and it's the easier option. It's not the best option. And I'm not going to mention companies, but there are certain cartels, for instance, around highways, where we don't really have expanded out, and we can't sometimes. And it's not always about in-house versus, delivering the service, with our own workforce, because we haven't always had that timescale. So, one of the things is not just agency, it's about getting it right so that we don't just have a presumption that we're going to be late, therefore we just have to renew and extend contracts.
It's one of my pet hates, that particular issue, because by the time we go past the too late button, all the power rests with the supplier. We don't have any power. So it's really important to have that conversation early. Within this gateway, which is new, we started running it in June, July. So we've got gateways 0, 1 and 2 running. Gateway 3 is pending. What we've been talking about recently is how do we fit the contract extension decision into this gateway process? Because you're absolutely right. It should not be, oh, oops, I'm too late. It's the only option I've got. What we should be doing is proactively saying, if you're going to extend, we need to have a conversation in this process. But we're trying to build one phase at a time and get it running before we move on to the next one. But you're absolutely right. And that's one of the things we are discussing right now.
Councillor Shaw.
Just for clarity purposes, is it that, just trying to understand, so if let's say a contract was 250,000,
yeah,
already spent 200,000, is there any way of the system flagging up saying, look, this is how much is left now, we've got to spend?
Yeah.
Or does that responsibility lie with you or the contract manager? And does the system show how much has been spent, and does it alert you?
So the Fusion system, which is what is used across the council for finance, for HR, for sourcing, includes a contract function within it. So if you had a contract for 100,000, I'm not going to go 250 because 80% of 250 is outside my mathematical ability, sorry. But the system does alert you when you've got to 80%. And I think, I might have to ask Dave for approval of what I'm about to say, but as far as I'm aware, it alerts the person. There's something called a blanket purchase agreement. And within that, it names the individuals who can raise purchase orders against a contract. Once you get to 80%, somebody gets an alert, and I'm not sure who it is. I might have to ask Dave for assistance. If you get to 100,000 and you raise another purchase order, the system won't allow you to do it. There's a hard stop at the value, which is new with this new financial system that's been installed. Can I ask for your help, Dave?
Terry, okay.
Sorry?
Terry, then Dave.
Yeah, it's just a small thing. The word cartel was mentioned, and I'm sure that was a rhetorical device.
Oh, sorry.
Rather than an accurate description of the state of play. Obviously, there are implications in saying the word cartel, and I'm sure Councillor Wilson would want to correct the record to show a little bit of rhetorical flourish in the use of the word cartel.
Yeah, I want to put it on public record. Councillor Paul is absolutely right. My rhetoric rather took me to an overblown use of the phrase. I think that sometimes, shall we say, that the market is more limited than what we would like to
Thank you, Councillor.
have in sort of more competitive environments.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Paul. Well corrected. Thank you.
Dave.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Rose. I'm sorry I can't be there this evening. I'm afraid the North Circular thwarted me on my attempts to get round to East London. I had to abandon and come home. I really wish I was there with you this evening. What Rose has set out is in response to what was a failure of compliance. So when you received a waiver for an insurance contract, it was because all the things that Rose has put in place since she's been here were not in place. So actually now Rose has put in place a contracts register. So we are encouraging people to make sure that all expenditure is under contract, because that's by far the better way of making sure we can extract value. There's a contract forward plan, and that's really important because they are the triggers to actually encourage people to go to market in time to maximise the value of actually their contract arrangement. So we are not rushing towards procurement decisions at the last minute. And the third thing that she's put in place is this gateway management review. All those things hang together on making sure that, that we have compliant systems. In the same way that we would use Fusion, which would mimic the controls that are in the system, but all of this is about behaviours of officers and training and making sure that officers are aware of the compliant processes that they need to follow and go through the process. And we can escort them through that way to make sure that we get compliant procurement. But compliant procurement is only half of the process. The other thing that Rose and her team are looking to introduce is value procurement, and actually making sure that we extract better value from our contractors going forward. So we are maximising those opportunities and developing the relationship with suppliers at the same time. So we can factor in social value and community wealth aspects to that procurement as well. So these are all major things that we're talking about. I don't think Rose is doing herself justice in her presentation, and I wish I was there just to keep on echoing the extra value that she's put in. But on the specific issue, the system will identify to officers the opportunity to make sure they do things properly, and the compliant processes will make sure that they do.
Thank you, Dave. You may, Councillor Lee Parkway.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this, and I've read the pack as well, so I've seen what you've said. I appreciate it, and I thank you for it, and I think it will be good to see in a year's time how you get on with this, especially considering you're only up to gate 2 and you've still got gates 3 and 4 to go through. So I think that'll be interesting to see how the whole thing plays out. But my question is about price. And what I mean by that is, how are you going to link performance to staff to this contract register to procurement? Because like in the section previously where we talked about managers and their performance appraisals being linked to their spending habits, etc. in the department, and those that done well being praised, those that didn't do so good, obviously maybe having a speaking to or a warning, etc. How have you linked that in to this system? Because it seems like you sorted out one side, but a lot of the issues that I saw in March were down to staff having, there was no ramifications for failure, basically. That's what I'm trying to say. And the question I'm asking is, how do you strengthen that side of the equation? You've done a good job on this side, looks great, and I'm sure in a year's time we'll see that it's worked. But what about the other side of the equation? What have you done there?
So the short answer is not much yet.
Okay.
And the reason for that is that contract management doesn't sit with procurement, it sits in the services at the moment. So so I think there's a process of education that needs to follow. And once this is set up, the next big project is actually a contract management framework. Because what often happens is you have an officer who's really good, and a social worker is a really good example, a really good social worker. They get promoted and they become a contract manager, but we don't give them any guidance. And it's really common across the public sector. That is not please don't take that as a criticism of Newham. It is very common right across the public sector that somebody's very good at what they do. We give them this additional response, but we don't actually give them any help. And contract management does need, when you're dealing with some of these private sector companies, and I've run private sector companies, so I kind of regard myself as a bit of a split personality at this point. But if you're a public servant, you're not necessarily very good on commercials. So we need to teach people, and we need to support them and develop them to understand how to have value conversations with suppliers. And we're not there yet, if I'm honest, Councillor. But that is the next. I mean, I've been talking about it for a while, and it's in my draft service plan. That developing a contract management framework is a key area of work to support the council in this important commercial area.
Yeah, Chair, if I may, I appreciate the answer, but it didn't necessarily answer the part that I asked. I understand in terms of the training and what you're going to do, but I was asking. So, okay, you haven't done anything yet, but what I'm asking is in performance appraisals and those sorts of things, are you going to link successful contracts or failure into those people's appraisals, essentially? And I understand what you're saying, that they haven't been trained, but my worry is there, and I think you're totally right on it, we shouldn't judge people on things they haven't been trained on, but then what's your plan for training them? And when will we see that?
I can, Chair. I think it's a very good question, and it deserves a wider answer. It doesn't just sit here. What you're talking about is corporate performance appraisal, right? And as we know, and I think not everybody in the organisation has an appraisal. I think there was a paper tabled 2 weeks ago at the audit board, which gave a rundown, and the council was nodding. It gave a rundown of the percentage of appraisals completed and logged on the system on Fusion. Important logged on, because the appraisal might have happened, but there might be a training need to put the appraisal. And as Dave is here, I was speaking to Dave about that very issue last week, because is there a training issue with Fusion, just a wider. So I think the wider point is, and I speak as the cabinet member where I don't have direct line responsibility for HR, but it sits in my portfolio. But the issue is performance management of the whole organization. Because what you're talking about is the reconstruction of job descriptions, right? To add in the sort of, I call it the commercial element, that might be contract origination and contract management. And I will say contract disposal. It may not be a technical word, but you know what I mean? When you finish a contract. But I suspect it's a whole piece of work and a bit of a journey. When I was appointed in 2018, we didn't have a complete footprint of appraisals across the organisation. I think that is where the answer is. And it's a question about our ability to be public sector minded in delivering services, but remember you're dealing with sometimes some very sharp operators in the private sector. But also,
it comes out their pocket when they
it does. Also, I think it's a challenge, just thinking about it, scrutiny as well, and for councillors. Because often councillors ask for things without any regard to how it's going to be procured. I remember when you start, you know, it's like playing rugby. If you give someone a bad pass, it just goes wrong, right? Sorry for those who have never played rugby, but it's a beautiful game. I played it for many years. But I think it's about, it's an organisational culture thing about when we want to do something, what are we asking for? More importantly, what are we buying? And often we don't ask that question. What is it we are buying? What is it we are procuring? And if we had that in our minds, no matter what it is, it will filter through the whole mechanism. When that thing procured comes through the respective cabinet member, they need to be asking, what is it I'm buying? What is it I'm procuring? What's the best in the market? Or just infect in a positive way that report. And then when it comes to scrutiny, the whole, what I'm really saying is, yes, it's a performance appraisal thing, but it's a whole organisational thing as well.
Yeah, I think you've gone much further than where I would have expected you to go. Like you're at level 5 now. I'm just saying level 2. That's all. You know.
I thought you wanted the answer.
No, but I think you've gone far. You've extended the whole organisation. You know this.
That's the answer.
No, it might be, but on the basic level, all I'm saying is that when we go to renew our insurance, if it doesn't go well, then I think there needs to be a mechanism by which you evaluate that and somebody is either rewarded or penalised. And that's all I'm saying. Forget everybody else. I'm just saying on the procurement. But
that is a performance appraisal system issue.
So, but when we say the whole organisation, we're talking about the lollipop men and women as well, because when we
if you're the question you asked was, how is the person going to be appraised?
Yeah.
That is to do with the person's job description and how that is written, right? That if you think about it, that is a whole organisational effort, because there are people now, what you're saying, if you take the logic of your argument, there are people now doing the job where in a job description doesn't refer to contract management, right? Now, if there was some trade union people in this room, they'll go, oh, changing job descriptions, got to have a consultation process, right? So what I'm saying, it is a slightly bigger question, and the answer gave you justice. The answer is not as simple as you allude to, Councillor.
Okay, can I intervene here? By way of time directions, we have now, we're now 8:30. So unless we want to move standing order, we need to start thinking of being more concise.
Yes.
Etc. So I noticed Councillor Wilson, and I'm looking around, Councillor Garfield, and Councillor Master, welcome. Right. I noticed Councillor Garfield, Councillor Wilson, and so Councillor Wilson.
Screen as well.
It's on the screen.
And who is on the screen? I cannot see my screen properly. Can you help me, Roger? Who's there?
Yeah, and Leslie.
Or Leslie? Okay, so because I haven't taken anyone from my screen, I need to be courteous to the people who are not on there. So I'm going to be Councillor Wilson, then on screen, then I come to you, Councillor Garfield. Thank you.
Mine is related to what's already reported elsewhere in terms of, the auditing of the whole progress of this. So it was relating to what I think Councillor Paul mentioned about fusion and people logging on. I think this committee needs a reassurance that it's not just an IT solution, and Councillor Paul rightly says it's a cultural imperative on members. I would say that it'll be a useful part of induction, to be honest, for the new administration coming in May, that we do have some of this, because both as a school governor and Ellen will know at 2 finance committees I chair, we've had training on value for money statements, for instance, and corporate governance, etc. And I think that culture needs to be in members as well. But when things are not logged on an IT system, and there has been issues around fusion, is there sort of like a non-IT manual backup, which is part of either the supervision process within the organisation, I mean supervision of staff, or is there enough procurement officers, in your opinion? Is there enough procurement officers to do those checks and balances if fusion is not doing ticking all the boxes, as it were? You rightly alluded to flagging up stuff coming on, flags.
Yeah.
What I'm saying at the most simplest is fusion all the thing? Are we putting all our eggs in that fusion basket, as it were?
I mean,
some dangers, I think, in that.
Again, Dave may wish to come in on this
should I start, Rose? Is there anything I forget? Yeah. You can put in. So actually, taking both your question and the previous question in the chamber, there is a truism about you fail to prepare to fail, and what Rose has put in place is the means by which senior management and indeed cabinet members and scrutiny committees can look at what is being planned over the next 2 or 3 years in terms of procurement, and that is our plan. And we need to review it, and we need to manage it, and we need to monitor it, and we need to make sure it's being stuck to, because that is the way that senior management will make sure that things are being done properly. It's not just about holding the individual to account, although that is an important part of performance appraisal. It's management's responsibility to make sure we have the processes in place to deliver the contracts and the savings that the council requires. What Rose has put in place is a mechanism for us to do that. And that's what we need to do on a regular basis.
So just as very quickly, so it links with things like the risk and the corporate risk. It's about value for money and quality and progress of contract, all of which can be summed up by those discussions, which might sometimes have to be robust around what fusion is highlighting and the very gateway process. Am I correct in that analysis?
Yes. You are, Councillor, and the only thing I would add to that is, of course, Rose would like more procurement officers to help her, and actually we need more procurement officers like Rose to help us get that extra value and go the extra mile.
Thank you, Chair. So you mentioned about members training. So I am now every month, actually sometimes every 2 weeks, doing some training on what's called the new managers induction sessions. So I do it's about a 3-hour session. Conrad and Andrew does something on finance, and there's governance, and I do a bit on procurement. So we are starting to do that. The intranet is sufficiently improved, so it walks people through a compliant process. And we have been running training on contract standing orders internally. I am aware that there's a conversation with one of my colleagues about an induction session for new members after the election. So all of those things are under consideration.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
I'm Councillor Nazir.
Thank you, Chair. I had
I can only see your forehead, Councillor.
Oh, sorry. I can't see myself with this screen. Now can you see me?
Need to go up a bit more. A bit more.
Is this me? Can you see me?
That's better.
I'm so sorry with this screen. I can't see myself. Okay. God, I hope I look okay. Anyway, whatever. So surely that's not important. I had a few questions, and they follow on quite neatly from Councillor Wilson's comments. In fact, they probably overlap. But I just wanted to reflect that, you know, I think the infrastructure here looks really solid. It looks formidable, and it's clearly been a lot of work to implement something like that over a beast that is the size of the council. So, you know, it's really commendable. However, you know, infrastructure is, you know, is a technical piece, and it's the values and the quality that's overlaid on top of that that actually delivers the goods for the people that we're seeking to serve. In fact, at the bottom, putting people at the heart of everything we do. And I think that it would just be good, if not in this meeting, perhaps at a subsequent meeting, to just fully understand where the value for money piece comes in, where the quality piece comes in. And a couple of colleagues have already touched on training and learning and development. I think that's really important when it comes to good procurement, because I've often seen, and admittedly much of this has perhaps been procured by previous administrations, but I've often seen that you know, there is that last minute gig that happens, and then, you know, you've got rollover of contracts, extension of contracts, a really poor needs assessment, you know, that you haven't got stakeholder involvement into who's being awarded contracts, and basically it just ends up being a bit of a zero-sum game and for the end user, and that's a really unfortunate place to arrive. And even though we have this, I'm still not entirely clear, and again, you know, we can come to this at another point, where that cultural piece happens, because this is plugging stuff into a mechanism, but actually the thought processes and the cultural context and the understanding of what makes a good service, and being willing to engage in that process, and, you know, be a bit bold and a bit courageous about looking at the different suppliers. You know, there was a C word used by Councillor Wilson, but it wasn't, you know, and obviously it's not that, but, you know, we do tend to have quite a limited pool of suppliers, and often we discriminate against other suppliers because of our very mechanisms, which again doesn't serve the end user very well. So I guess my question is around, how do we put the cultural context around this mechanism so it actually does deliver real value, as opposed to delivering a more efficient system but with the same outcomes. Thank you, Chair.
Who's going to take that?
Me.
Okay, Rose.
Thank you. So the value for money piece is clearly one which is different for every contract. So the Gateway Review Group includes Andrew Ward as Deputy Section 151. It includes legal, finance, myself, audit, and I can't remember the last person, but it includes a group of professionals who look at every business case that comes through procurement. And those are brand new business cases that I've helped to develop, that based on my knowledge, which tries to draw out from a commissioner what it is they're buying, why are they buying it, does it link to Newham's pillars? We do quite a lot of work on that. We've also been doing, you know, for me, value is more than just the price of a pen. You know, when you work in public service, it's about, are we spending our money locally? Are we keeping the Newham bound in Newham? Are we buying from local suppliers? So we're now publishing the contract register on the website, so local suppliers can see what we're going to do and when we're going to do it. We're doing a lot of work with, I've helped to develop a training programme for new suppliers to come into our supplier pool. So we're trying to feed the bottom of the supplier pool. I'm doing a talk on Thursday to an event hosted by London City Airport for new suppliers that may want to tender. So we're doing quite a lot of work trying to bring in new suppliers, particularly local suppliers, into the supplier pool. We're running training sessions. We've done videos for them so they can see how to log on, because for them to bid for anything, they need to be registered on Fusion. which sounds like a simple thing. It's not quite as simple as registering for EasyJet or something. It's quite, you have to put your VAT number and all sorts of things in. So we've done videos to help suppliers do it. So we've done a lot of work to try and feed new suppliers into the business. The team, we have got, you know, largely new people in procurement, our category leads. They are much better at stakeholder management and engagement. And we're talking with stakeholders. We're involved in market engagement events before a big procurement. And we've been supporting the, I think it's the RMS project. We're trying to help get more supplies into the supply chain. So, you know, there's no single answer that prove that, you know, that we can answer your question, but there's a whole range of things that we're trying to add.
Thank you. Chair, could I just have a very quick supplementary?
Very quickly, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your answer. It's really reassuring that it's not one silver bullet. It will take a holistic approach, doubtless. But I guess it would be, and again, a colleague has touched on this, but it would be really helpful and perhaps at another point to understand what the KPIs and indicators are around this. How do you measure that this is working well? And what does that look like? What do you expect procurement to look like vis-a-vis what it currently looks like or has looked like, you know, over the past years? So what is the real difference here? And again, that's not entirely visible beyond sort of, it should be more structured and more organized and more centralized, but in terms of quality, it'd be good to understand that. And I'm just really struck that I was in a scrutiny meeting a while back, and again, as I said, it's something commissioned by a previous administration year. However, there was lack of clarity on how many people were being served, how many days were being used, and this just seemed quite as if it was accepted, and this lack of clarity was tolerated, and I found it utterly intolerable. So it would just be good again to really think about the precision and the quality that we're demanding from our suppliers, as well as how we're supporting our suppliers and ensuring that we diversify the pool of suppliers that we currently use. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Paul Leslie.
Thank you, Chair. Point has been well made, actually, in terms of recognising that procurement of services, especially from grassroots organisations, are different to, if you like, the procurement of desks and tables. So there's a capacity issue that I think was alluded to earlier internally around the structures that the council's using to procure, and it was alluded to in terms of the last conversation around the work that is still needed to be done organizations who can contract it in. So I just wanted to reiterate the point to some extent, and that really is about capacity at both ends. So I'm concerned that we throw baby out with bathwater to some extent in terms of the landscape being far too challenging for grassroots organisations to take part in the procurement process. Can you, again, I know you've mentioned training is on sort of taking place now, but what is the measure going to be? And I think it was mentioned earlier, Chair, that you know, understanding clear KPIs, but I'm concerned that we don't, whilst we're, if you like, levelling the playing field, lose organisations that find the landscape too difficult to navigate. So could I get a little bit more clarity on what the support is to enable organisations from across the piece to access the procurement process? And also, you know, do we know what good looks like at this stage? And if we don't, can we be clear about that sooner rather than later? Thank you, Chair.
Who's going to take it?
I'll start, and perhaps Councillor Paul might then step in. The question is very appropriate, but it's also wider than procurement. It's not just the procurement team who can do this. We need to work with colleagues in community wealth, make sure that they are actually working with us so that we can support local suppliers to enter into procurement. And if there are problems about actually becoming registered on our portals and on our list, then we need to make sure that that's there, and we probably need to provide training sessions on that. Rose has written a paper on social value and how that's factored into procurement, and that would be one of the ways that we could actually also leverage in some more local suppliers, and the way that we measure that, and that will be a decision that we go in front of Cabinet. I'm not sure exactly the timetable for that, whether or not we'll get that in before the election or not. But it's a good point, but it does go wider than the actual procurement process that we have. We can support it, but we're at one end, and we need to make sure that we've got people lining up at the other and can plot that route through, which is quite difficult, as Rose pointed out, not just technically, but actually being able to submit responses to tender specifications. If you're not used to doing it, you need to actually find out the way of doing that, and then that will actually help you win local government contracts. And maybe the measure, the KPI, is how many local suppliers are actually being awarded contracts by the local council.
Thank you. I have Councillor Garfield to bring in and Councillor Avinder Singh already. Okay. Councillor Garfield.
Thank you, Chair. I feel like the question I wanted to ask has been touched on quite a bit since I wanted to ask it. So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I hope it's a good thing. But I wanted to ask, with the gateway management system, is it also being used to monitor community wealth building and ESG, so that for the lifetime of a contract that has successfully gone through procurement, it is in real time identified by officers in Newham whether it is delivering what would have been in the bid in terms of the thing that you wrote the paper on. So I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, with ESG and the community wealth building programme that Newham is doing, because I imagine that is a hefty weighting of all the bids that go out for tender from the council.
Can I come in?
You may.
Thank you, Chair. So social value is a requirement of the Social Value Act 2012, and the focus on it has steadily increased. And COVID has put even more focus on social value as being one of the tools to help with pandemic recovery. Hence the paper to CMT, and which we're going forward to Cabinet or Cabinet briefing, I'm not sure which. We should be reporting on local spend, and interestingly, we're talking through the presentation, so I think some of the following slides are going to go much more quickly because we've talked through some of the stuff. But the Gateway 4 up there is in that, and it kind of answers your question a bit, Councillor Fatway, is that building block is in there so that we can call in contract managers to say, how is this contract performing once you've got the contract management framework live? Because my personal view is we can spend a load of time and resources in procurement and all these specialists procuring a contract, and then we award the contract and we give you the contract. If it's not properly monitored and managed, then the value and the benefits won't be delivered. So clearly contract management, that's why, I started my procurement life as a contract manager, so I'm particularly in favour of it. And for bigger contracts, it's about what's called supplier relationship management, which is more strategic than an operational day-to-day. So there's a whole bit of work to be done on that. When you say ESG, can I ask what you mean?
Yeah, environmental social governance. So being a huge part of it.
Sorry, yeah.
That's fine, that's fine. So
I've been working really closely with Community Wealth Building Directorate, and we've created a tool. Well, actually, I use the royal we. One of my bright sparks in the team has developed this tool to enable us to evaluate what is being offered by bidders. And if you were to offer an apprenticeship and somebody else were to offer a carbon reduction, how do I evaluate that when I've only, so it provides us with a fair and public mechanism for saying to one bidder, you've lost because this scored slightly higher. It's a national toolkit and it's allocated nationally.
Terry, this would have to be a quick one.
Sorry.
Yeah, just to answer Paul's question, really, it's really good. Obviously, Rose has said some of the work she's doing on improving the marketplace, and there has been some work with the Chamber of Commerce, which we've done. So we've done that. We've gone out to the Newham Chamber of Commerce to talk about how we're opening up the council supply chain. The issue on social value, just to provide reassurance, I've got a meeting tomorrow at 9:30, which is very early for me, about a particular contract. I'm not going to mention the area, but I want to read a section of the contract of the report, which might provide, you know, we said we're at the early foothills of social value, but I'll just read this and provide some assurance. A key ambition of the council is to support the local economy and towards a better Newham COVID recovery strategy. This department is in a strong position to be able to contribute to these by appointing a non-exclusive core provider. The procurement strategy presents the opportunity to facilitate engagement of a diverse market of local suppliers through their separate supply chains. The overall approved strategy was designed to address barriers faced by SMEs, micro businesses, startups, and emerging businesses in competing for council contract over the term of this core contract. Therefore, in addition to the core contract, which is subject to this report, the council intends to look at threshold levels, look at its frameworks, and look at local suppliers, right? And it's also for local suppliers unable to access the council's contract directly through a framework, secure development of their capacity and business through their support and development by the appointed main head supplier, right? So that is live, Paul, just to give you that assurance. I have a meeting on this very thing tomorrow. I know we're at the early foothills of this, but hopefully by me reading you out without betraying the confidential confidences, to give you that assurance, it's a live thing and we are making progress on that.
Thank you for that. Good. Councillor Singh and Vardy.
Yeah, Chair, thank you. I did post that question to you.
Where I'm sitting, I can only see your forehead again. You need to.
It was about exactly what Councillor Paul has been talking about, is engaging the local economy to be able to contribute to Newham, and a lot has been said. So I'm not going to ask the question now because the answers are there, and I would appreciate, obviously, how we do move forward with this and all the work that's been done behind the scenes. Thank you to all the officers and Councillor Paul as well.
I struggle to hear you there. Have you heard him?
No, I didn't.
I struggle to hear you, and I don't think officers have heard you.
Can I start again?
Right, so you're not asking the question? Okay, thank you. We need to move on then. I haven't seen anyone else in the chamber.
Moving.
Just scanning the online Councillor Wilson, I've noticed you there.
Well, I was being procedural. Do we need to move standing orders?
Okay, I think we will have to move standing orders.
Extension to dispose of this item and all others not exceeding 15 minutes.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. That is perfectly in order. Thank you. Do I have a second to Councillor Wilson? Thank you. Okay, so that's agreed. So we have a 15 minutes extension, and I am hoping we don't have to use it for 15 minutes. Is between Rose and Dave, I know you put up one slide and that gave issue to a whole host of questions. Are there any more aspect of your presentation that is important, materially important to what we're discussing that you want to share with us?
Not really. I mean,
sorry, Rose has answer for that.
So the rest of the slides basically talk to this one and explain this one, and we've been through it. What I would say is the very last slide talks about KPIs, and I'm reviewing those because they were developed by the council before I got here, and we clearly need to review them to ensure value.
I will ask for the committee's indulgence. Let's go to the last slide because I don't know when we will come back to procurement issues again. So if we go to the last slide and see if members have any questions.
And I think this relates to Farah alluded to the point in her question, Councillor Nazir, about KPIs, and I think this.
Yeah.
So if you take 1 minute to present this, to just give an overview on this, and then I have some members if that have any questions.
I mean, they're largely self-explanatory. They were developed by the council before, as I got here, I mean, number of procurement projects completed, you know, some of this is not performance, this is just producing numbers. We need to report on performance and value. So, you know, the value of the contracts, the number of contracts, again, not really, yes, it provides a figure, but what we should be talking about is more about savings value, social value. Somebody asked me about social value. There was a cabinet question on social value. It's taken me months to try and get that information. So the gateway process has been developed to capture all of that. So, you know, we're trying to kind of build systems that will enable us to report on value, even though, you know, we haven't got all of it sorted yet. So I'm not really going to say anything else on that.
Okay, thank you. Any member? No, so no member. Councillor Nazir.
Thank you, and thank you for recognising the question on KPIs. And I think the reason I asked the question is almost exactly what you've said. You know, this churns out numbers, but it doesn't tell us much about value insofar as I can discern from what's here. So I think it would be really important at some point to understand what the value equation looks like that sits behind the numbers, because otherwise this is just computer says yes, and you know the value question isn't answered. So that would be really helpful, because certainly I remember, again, you know, very recently at a scrutiny meeting, hearing that it was absolutely integral that the council commissioned to a set of standards, but then when asked whether or not our suppliers held those standards, the answer was no. So, you know, it's really important that we are adhering to our own principles and we're monitoring value. Thank you.
And can I say, Scrutiny is looking forward for your embedding of the gateway management. Also the introduction eventually of the value procurement that you are planning, that is in the pipeline, and contract manager in terms of training and coaching senior or contract managers in how to manage contracts. So we are looking forward to that, and I'm sure at some future date you'll come back to us to tell us how these are going. So it's something for some future work plan in terms of procurement, the procurement journey. Okay, and what I should say at this stage, thanks to the chairs who took part in March of last year. Because of that, we've seen the journey and the progress made from then to now in the procurement strategy and the procurement of the council. So again, the second time I'm thanking my colleagues for the evening, the work that we have done.
I remember that day well.
Do I?
Scarred on my memory. 12:30 I was summoned, wasn't I?
How keen we were then. And still is. Okay, thank you, everyone. Thank you for attending.
Chair, apologies. Can I just ask a very, very quick question around the KPIs? And Chair, we're sitting in our sector around a number of tables where the question around KPIs and EDI, equality, diversity and inclusion is often raised. So I wondered whether built into the KPIs could be a measure for the one based on an EDI question around how many Black, Asian or diverse community-led organisations actually do win contracts. Currently, there is no measure for that. It's not a question of equality, it's a question of inclusivity. So I wonder, when we're thinking about the KPIs, if the EDI question could feature quite prominently.
Can I would ask officers to note that, and we come back to you that in writing, given the time constraints. So it's a valid contribution, and we come back to you. And thanks. The committee will now move to item 7, and that is a review or a reporting by myself to the work that has been done from last week to now, I suppose, because our last meeting was last week, so there's nothing to report on. So can I defer that to the next meeting? Item 8, update from chairs. I have 2 chairs present. Is there any update? Given that our last meeting was Is there any update, colleagues?
Only that we had a very successful visit to Plain Waste Facility. Beyond that, no update, Chair.
No update from the Chair.
Thank you. Appointments, there's no appointments to be made or to be reported on. Item 10, work program. Can I say that for this municipal year, Scrutiny has a very ambitious work program. However, given that in a few weeks' time, we will be going into the holiday period, I am proposing to have a meeting with the chairs, with the management committee of Scrutiny, the management officers and other officers and other stakeholders to discuss and decide how we go forward with the remaining work that we have in hand. So I would report the colleagues as soon as those meetings have taken place and we can do a resolution on how we go forward. So can I ask that you note those comments? Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, with the caveat that in the pre-election period that we have those reports that are almost due for completion. I'm not taking, you said, I'm not diminishing the importance of what you said about management at the end of this 4-year period that we have. There's a unique institution in London. Everybody else has, you know, three elections every 3 years and a third of the council. So we are faced with this sort of buffer approach. But so with the caveat that if there's outstanding work that the Commission is almost due to report on, I don't want it slipping into a new administration. So, and it's the pre-election period, I always stress. I don't use the other word.
Thanks for your comments, Councillor Wilson. We would take those on board when we meet to have the discussion. And we would inform this committee on the decisions. Thank you. The Council Forward Plan, item 11. Is there any item to be raised on the Council Forward Plan? Looking on screen, I cannot see anyone. Is there anyone on screen? No, if there's no one in the chamber for this item.
Sorry, Chair.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I didn't notice your hands. Councillor Nazir.
Thank you. I just had a comment around form rather than content, and I just sort of wondered about the feedback that we expect to hear. So, for example, you know, some of these work plans, there are specific things that that officers have committed, or the executive have committed, that they're going to revert back to us on. So I just wondered if we need to note some of that there, so there's a bit of a feedback loop rather than it being sort of blank. So actually feedback from the meetings that we've already had. So there's a sort of continuation of the narrative.
Yep, good point.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. That's noted. And I would take that up with the chairs and the executive, so that we make certain that the comments that you make, we take it on board.
Yeah.
Any other? No? Okay. Thank you, Councillor. We now move to item 12. And the date of the next meeting, I have a schedule for the 17th of March. Is that date still holding, Roger? 17th of March. Okay. So thank you, and colleagues, I look forward to seeing you on the 17th of March. And I now bring this meeting to a close. It's now 21:04. Thank you all for attending. And before, I suppose this is our last budget monitoring for this municipal year. Thank you all for your contribution and your hard work during the entire municipal year in terms of budget commission, scrutinizing the budget in terms of the mayor's and the executive budget, and also for budget monitoring as we've just concluded this evening. So thank you for the work that you've done, and I look forward to seeing you on the 17th of March.